practice architecture and is an academic in Jamaica and the Caribbean. Today, she will be speaking on evolution of architecture in the Caribbean. Welcome to Trinidad.
Okay, you're hearing. All right, I'm not hearing anything, but let me know if you want me to start in the interest of time. Yes, please. Okay. All right. So just thanks to I/E for the invitation to be a part of this conference. I have to say that I was coerced into this by Dion Wilson, and also it is encouraged by the chair of ACSAC, Linda Moore. So there is much a part of the content that you will see presented today as I have written. I've done most of the heavy lifting, but it's quite an extensive topic in that we're looking at 30 years past and 30 years future. I can say that this is not, obviously, the evolution of architecture in the Caribbean is quite extensive, centuries old. So we're in a limited time frame. So this 30-30 is a glimpse of recent history and what we anticipate as a group and members of ACSAC would be the future 30 years. So I'm just going to share my screen. And if for any reason you stop hearing me, I'll just keep my eye on the chat and hopefully I'll pick it up. Let me know if you're seeing this. Are you seeing the screen? I expect so. I'm just gonna start the slideshow from the beginning. Okay. We are seeing the screen. Okay. Are you seeing the first slide? You're seeing all the slides. A little bit of an issue there. Not anymore. Okay.
Hi, Jacquiann. Can you hear us now?
I can.
Okay, great. Yes, we're able to see your full slide now on the first screen. So you can, yes, everything is perfect now. So please go ahead.
Okay. Let me know if you can see the second slide. Can you see the second slide now?
No, we're only able to see the first slide.
Okay.
Can you try switching forward to see? Yes, we're able to see it now.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. let me just go back to the beginning. Um, all right, are you seeing any slides?
Yes, we're able to see one.
Mm. You know, when we did this yesterday, it worked perfectly fine.
It's working fine now. It's changing. We can see the map of AXAC locations. You're back to the first slide. And now you're back to sharing all of the slides again.
Okay. All right, you're seeing the first slide?
Yes, yes, we are.
See if I can move these slides ahead without losing you.
Oh, he has it. Oh. Do you want to ask him if he could load it up? Yeah, we have it here. So, Jacquiann, we can also load your slides from here.
Please do.
Okay, all right. Because we're able to see your full PowerPoint now, just not in slideshow mode.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening.
Okay, would you like to start with a brief background while we get your slides loaded, and I'll tell you once it's up on the screen, and you could just tell us when to switch. Are you able to see the PowerPoint projection screens from where you are?
I'm not.
No.
But I can tell, I can tell you which slide to, I can say one, next.
Okay, sure. We're just loading it up from this end. Sorry, everyone. Please bear with us. If you would like to have a coffee or tea, another dessert.
Well, let me just give a background anyway while it's being loaded up, which this is really the second slide. I really want to sort of open the talk talking about the context of small island developing states and architecture and the environment in the context of small island states. So small island developing states aggregate population is about 65 million. This is slightly less than 1% of the world's population. And the Caribbean represents 20% of United Nations SIDS and 50% of the Commonwealth. Small island states, as we know, are really large ocean states whose importation of goods and services are dependent on international trade. The current 100-year storm surge riverine maps of coastal towns and cities in the Caribbean predict islands will contend with reduced land area and increased population growth. The Commonwealth Association of Architects, CAA, conducted a survey of built environment professionals in 2020, and it reported that 46% of Bahamas' total population lives at an elevation about 5 meters, below 5 meters, with Antigua at 32% and St. Kitts and Nevis, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines at 20%. So the status of vulnerability, loss of land, resilient capacity of towns and cities in the Caribbean are under duress. I think we all know this, but we're also witnessing the retreat of habitation and civic functions to higher levels. Coastal protection projects, revetments, highway infrastructure, and being installed or developed away from coastlines as cities contend with the climate predictions. Coastal towns traditionally settle for economic and military reasons. And as you witness, cities and towns produce a lot of carbon dioxide. It's also the state, the capitals, the towns that are administrative centers and places for critical infrastructure and emergency services. The CAA survey also recognized that the scale of CO2 emissions and inequity across the Commonwealth. Scaling incentives to reduce CO2 within the Caribbean are actually very complex and based upon multiple variables. As we know, we may not know, that includes the area, the size of the island, the population, industrial activities, transportation, deforestation, energy production, and renewable sources. So in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, the carbon dioxide production per capita is effectively equivalent to all other Commonwealth SIDS islands combined, but TNT is half the square area of both the Bahamas and Jamaica. So the CO2 production in the Bahamas is 3 times that of Jamaica, with a population that is only 13% of Jamaica's. Yet the Bahamas and Jamaica have equivalent square kilometers, about 10,000 square kilometers. Biodiversity of island states holds spiritual, aesthetic, and cultural values. Communities rely on biodiversity for air quality, food security, and well-being. Strong biodiversity can generate revenue for SIDS and offset CO2 emissions. So the construction industry accounts for approximately 40% of the global energy-related emissions, and therefore building on tropical islands with limited natural and human-made resources impacts architecture of the Caribbean.
We're able to see your slides, Jackie. So we're on the second or the first slide now.
Okay, so the next slide, please.
Yes.
Architecture for a total environment is not a novel idea, although the current circumstances of the environment are. Andreas Kalpaki historically recounts industrialization as the ideological position of the International Union of Architects from as early as post-war period in the 1960s to the 1960s. In his paper entitled R. Buckminster Fuller and the Architectural Consequences of Total Environment, he states industrialization has been a part of the UIA's agenda since the Union's foundation in 1948, when the first Congress introduced international study of industrial production and building elements for housing projects. In 1961, at the 6th UIA Congress held in London, the title was New Techniques, New Materials. Kalpaki elaborates on Buckminster Fuller's talk, and he recounts a paper saying his paper was aimed at an inventory of the planet's resources, at rearranging industrial systems to increase efficiency and to readdress all the results of industrialization to a social cause. The other interesting thing coming out of that paper is this quotation is the coming of an epoch in which industrialization would make the planet's resources the final limit to mankind's inhabitation possibilities. I find it really intriguing that this was Buckminster Fuller's presentation in 1961, and some of these issues we're contending with today. The counter debate of regionalism presented an architecture cited in a specific place, whether romantic or later critical by Frampton, as a strategy to mediate the impact of universal civilization with elements derived indirectly from the peculiarities of a particular place. Next slide, please. Regionalism across the Caribbean Commonwealth manifested in various forms. During the 1940s, the University College of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Papine, was conceived as a single tertiary education institution that would fulfill the needs of the West Indies. British architects Norman and Dauben were commissioned to design a campus in 1946, and the West Indies University College project was developed as on the ideals of a total West Indies, although the West Indian Federation was established by the British Caribbean Federation Act in 1956. Next slide, please. Architect Colin Laird was born in North Shields, England, 1924, and an aircraft navigator in World War II. He was also keen yachtsman, sailing the Atlantic single-handedly and passionate advocate of the West Indian Federation. As an architect, he tried to help an independent nation forge its identity through architecture. And although he designed several residential buildings, including Coverlett's house apartments, today he's primarily known for his major urban projects. Today, these projects form a significant part of the visual and spatial identity of Port of Spain, including Queen's Hall, Hasty Crawford Stadium and Jean Pierre Complex, the National Library, Brian Lara Promenade. As a testament to the public embrace of his work, the promenade design is replicated, although never as successfully in many other urban areas around the country. In the words of his wife, Jeanette, he was very much more a Trinidadian than I ever have been or will be, and became a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago in 1964. Next slide, please. Prior to independence, prior to Jamaican independence in 1962, the private practices of Wilson John, Harold Ashwell, and Memorial Sibley Robinson were established. Contractors were still designing and constructing most buildings then. Early practices strategically offered design and build services, in the case of Wilson Chang and engineer Leonard Chang, McMorris Sibley Robinson, and contractors Marley and Plant. Alternately, local architects who were foreign trained practiced with the Public Works Department. The PWD was the government architectural firm with the responsibility of all government facilities other than the Ministry of Transportation. MSR, McMorris Sibley Robinson, all graduated from schools in Canada, University of Manitoba and McGill, and VR McMorris and J.P. Sibley started the practice in 1955. They were later joined by H.W. Robinson in 1958. Significantly, their studio was the mentoring forum for generations of Jamaicans who studied externally and returned home to practice, including the first female architect from Canton, McGill University, 1964. MSR were also identified as associate architects for multinational corporations with foreign architects investing capital through regional offices in Kingston. The example of the British American building, which is now the VM Group building in New Kingston, and the IBM World Trade Corporation building, which you see here. They're now the MSR engineers, and the firm is led by Julian and Nicholas McMorris, civil and structural engineers. So it's an intergenerational practice of about 69 years. It's interesting that the generations that came after the leading MSRs decided to be engineers rather than keep an architectural practice. Okay, next slide, please. H.D. Repole Associates was established in 1967, became Repole Architects Planners in 1980. Herbert Denham Repole was a graduate again of the University of Manitoba in Canada. He was the president of the Jamaica Society. He was not the Institute, he was Society of Architects from 1972 to 74, and an honorary member of Mexican Society of Architects, 1975, executive member of the Pan American Federation of Architects, and an honorary member of the Colombian College of Architects, 1976. He's well known for the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank in Basse-Terre. Daniel Repole was the design coordinator and principal architect of the project, along with John Coke, AIA NCAR member, the assistant coordinator, and Stephen Jameson, our ARB UK, the project architect. So their design intent was elegant simplicity. The atrium, which was a typical element in most of Repole architect planners' buildings, quite often expanding to a clerestory now. Ziggurat stepping forward. I just want to say that this slide, all of those buildings on that street are Repole buildings. So the extent to which architecture is a single edifice um, really kind of tested the boundaries of how architecture in the public realm becomes a part of the street, and is really as much as an act of planning um, as it is a singular object within an urban context. Okay, sorry, next slide. The atriums provide long vistas, natural light, reduction of energy consumption, stress reduction for occupants, and increased productivity. Materials of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank were chosen, and this is from the project proposal document, chosen bearing in mind their life cycle costs, the use of indigenous material, volcanic stone, and hardwoods from the Eastern Caribbean. The structural system comprised concrete shear walls, roof trusses, external precast concrete panels, and fins to mediate solar radiation and light. The scale of the components and the feasibility of construction machinery on site were all design considerations. The project intent stated, one cannot emphasize enough the desire to achieve a total Caribbean entity within the structure, one that can boast that it has drawn its inspiration from a variety of influences in the region. Next slide, please. Industrial production of building elements in the works presented in the period 1940s to 1990s in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica were sensitive to the site scale, structural and constructional capacity, material, light, and landscape of the region. In the project proposal for the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank report also refers to the Jamaican Institute of Architects engagement and ethical code for the development of the profession of architecture, which calls for integrity, technical and artistic ability, business capacity, and a grave responsibility to the public to ensure the works are safe and enhance the community. It goes on to call for the upholding the highest standards of practice and conduct, including a moral responsibility to other architects in fair competition, and a vow to entrust the client with the honesty and impartiality in all actions, including arbitration. Next slide, please. The International Union of Architects Post-War Ideals of Industrialization from 1948 as regionalism in the Caribbean had less to do with Buckminster Fuller's inventory of the planet's resources for efficiency of industrialization to a social cause, and more to do with the totality of a region's diversity and ethical practice. The education of architects starting in 1988, the Caribbean School of Architecture was a project of modernity for the English-speaking Caribbean. ACSAC sought to create a school as part of its manifesto. In 1983, ACSAC lobbied for the Commonwealth Association of Architects at the CAA conference in Sydney, Australia, for the establishment of a school. The CAA board appointed a consultant, Professor Ivy Smith, to visit the region and make recommendations. His report, Architects, Architectural Education in the Caribbean, 1984, followed wide consultation, including visits to the Bahamas, Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. The report made recommendations for the need of a school and a rationale for its location at CAST, College of Arts, Science, and Technology in Jamaica. Kingston was unanimously supported, but the Jamaica proposition was unanimously supported by the region, and CAST commenced the project for establishment of the Caribbean School of Architecture, which was realized as a discrete unit in 1988. Professor Smith's consultancy for the development of the school continued until the year 2000. The accommodation for the flagship program of the school was modest yet functional, occupying few classrooms of the CAST building department. An advisory committee chaired by architect Marvin Goodman was appointed, and sponsorship received from Professor Emeritus Edward Crane from the University of Florida, Gainesville, and architect Melanie Richardson of the UK. The technical program enlisted tutors and lecturers who are practicing architects in Jamaica and visiting regional architects from the Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guadeloupe. Initially, integrating a pan-Caribbean cultural and historical context. The CSA has attained continuous 5-year unconditional validation from the CSA has they continue. Sorry, I'm trying to go slowly because I know we're under a timeline here. But the Caribbean School of Architecture has attained continuous 5-year unconditional validation from the CAA from 2012 to current. Sorry, next slide, please. Registration in Jamaica was passed in 1987. The first meeting of Architects Registration Board was convened to draft the regulations, decide the information to be included into the Register of Architects, and the section of the Act which governs the registration of persons who were practicing as architects before the Act became effective. The board also listed numerous requirements such as standards of education and general character. In 2009, an amendment was made to the Act cited as Architects Registration, Architects Seal Regulations 2009. And as of 2024, the total number of registered architects living resident and non-resident in Jamaica is 206. Total number of registered architects currently licensed to practice is 117. In Trinidad and Tobago, the Board of Architecture of Trinidad and Tobago, BOAT, was established by law in 1992 after several years of lobbying by the Trinidad and Tobago Institute of Architects. Statutorily, the primary function of the constituted board was and remains to provide the registration of architects with the aim of regulating the profession and ultimately protecting the public interest. As a consequence, the board achieves this by the verification of professional qualifications and experience, as well as testing candidates on their knowledge and norms of professional practice. As of 2024, this year, some 158 architects have been registered by the board. Currently, the board is actively seeking amendments to the existing act to provide for the protection of the title architect, the implementation of a system of annual licensure, and the enshrinement of the requirement of CPD as part of minimum requirement for annual licensing. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going on now to Future 30. I hope everyone is still with me. Yes. We all here?
Yes, we are with you. Please continue.
Great. Thank you for responding. Okay, so we're going on now to Future 30, which is part 2 of the presentation. And 2 parts to this, actually. To discern the status of architecture today and implications for the future, we conducted a survey entitled The Regulatory Framework of Architecture in the Caribbean. It was administered through our chair, Linda Moore of Barbados, architect, and we received responses from the ARBs, the registration boards, and the institutes, the Professional Architecture Institute from Barbados, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Trinidad, and Tobago. So 93% of the respondents were familiar with the regulatory framework in the Caribbean. Emerging themes were trade liberalization, registration and professional development, the registration process, the education of architects, and practice today and the future. We'll go through those. And also we conducted interviews of practitioners in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago established within a 10 to 20 year period. We'll show a few case studies that will reveal their design ethos, approaches to design, and unique attributes of each practice. Next slide, please. Trade liberalization. So these are the themes on this slide that you're seeing. The next slide, please. The CARIFORUM Directorate is at an advanced stage in the development of the draft CARIFORUM Mutual Recognition Agreement for professionals qualifications of architects and the draft model harmonized MRA for CARIFORUM Architects Bill. Both seek to guide the legislation required for CARIFORUM architects for interregional trade liberalization of professional services. The legislation also seeks to meet international obligations in the context of the CARIFORUM EU EPA Economic Partnership Agreement. In response to the survey, regional architects believe that the likelihood of implementation ranges from 100 to 50%, with one country at 25%. The responses welcome closer professional relationships and amalgamation of regional architects to drive competitive prowess, mobility, but there's also a fear of opening borders. Next slide, please. Registration and professional development. Registration acts of the respondent countries were legislated in 1987, 1992, 2003, and 2005. In the absence of a registration act, architects support building and planning codes in law that strive for practice standards, structural guidelines, health, safety, and security, and enforcement of local regulations. Continued professional development, or CPD, is required for licensure in most states where a registration act exists. In one country, there's a CPD requirement for licensing in the proposed amendments to the Profession Act. However, if prescriptive, the legislation runs the risk of being obsolete. The issue of how prescriptive CPD ought to be to maintain licensure remains questionable. Respondents all agree that the post-professional education is crucial, critical, and essential to the sustainable development of architecture in the wider built environment. Next slide, please. The registration process. 60% of respondents say it's important to update the registration process and examination to reflect industry changes. For example, to include continued awareness of international standards for practice, building science, sustainability, environment management, and business acumen. Essential future skills needed were ranked very high with technical at 87%, technical proficiency, climate literacy 80%, cross-cultural communication and AI proficiency were equally ranked at about 73%. And interestingly, project management, the lowest at 66%, which is really a shift in things because project management about 15 years ago might have been the highest mark. Localized building science and architecture theory were also identified as future knowledge areas. Recommendations for improvement of the registration process include rigorous assessment of qualifications and experience of the candidate, combined internship and or mentorship through joint partnerships of the institutes and ARBs in each country, digitizing the examination process, and creating a regional guidebook that outlines the process, topics, codes of conduct. 73% of the institutes responding to the survey already have mentorship and internship programs. So this may be for the future another step forward. Recognizing flexibility in educational pathways ranked high as a future mechanism, and 60% of the respondents believe the current registration process does not hinder candidates from diverse backgrounds. Next slide, please. Education of architects. The survey indicated that the percentage of graduates from the regional schools, CSA, who are registered are approximately 35% in Jamaica, 22% in Trinidad and Tobago, and 15% in Barbados, 12% in St. Lucia. Architects in these territories say that exposure of students to industry through apprenticeship, cooperative education programs, or design build projects focused on making, will better prepare graduates for practice. There's also an emphasis on design thinking, architecture theory, exploring the role of artificial intelligence in teaching and learning. 64% of the survey respondents thought it important to adapt traditional climate design approaches to the current climate crisis. So traditional climate design to the current climate crisis. This supports a comment that the industry research is on the impact of the built environment and climate change can provide valuable information to structure education programs. Next slide, please. Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, Barbados, and St. Lucia identified capacity gaps in the consistency of building codes, legislation, and enforcement. Registration boards and institutes are seeking a common framework. The factors most affecting development are economic and regulatory, followed by social and environmental. There's a call for more conferences, seminars, workshops, short courses. The inclusion of guidelines, for example, Occupational Health and Safety Administration, OSHA, green building roadmaps, rating systems can assist in guiding best practice and the public valuing of architecture, engineering, and the built environment. On the question of how architecture is valued by the public, in each territory, each country, 50% said a little, 50% moderate amount. The response that was most inspiring is, I would say a lot. This has changed over the years, where 20 years ago, I would have said moderate. 63% of practices were 2 to 5 persons, followed by 13% 6 to 10 persons and sole practitioners. Yet as a community, small community, the advocacy in practice, immeasurable. Members of the architecture community advocate for professional integrity as committee members who guide state and municipal organizations with built environment deliberations, and in education as mentors and trainers. Percentage of women architects are approximately 35% in Jamaica, 26% Barbados, 22% Trinidad, Tobago, and 5% in St. Lucia. Women in architecture are more visible today than 30 years ago. International and regional publications, along with social media channels, offer great opportunities for the experiences and accomplishments of women to be heard. Okay, next slide, please. How are we doing for time?
Yes, we are over time, but so if you could wrap up within 2 minutes, that would be perfect.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. Well, let me just go through the next few slides quickly. The first, if you just, the next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so we identified quite a few practices that we thought would open up the conversation about what practice might be for the next 30 years. This is Rudeline Dufour Roberts. So she's been in an oral practice since the year 2000, but very much involved with the she spent 12 years at the Restoration Unit, Ministry of Transportation and Works. Before that, she was a senior architect at ADB. But you can see what her call-out quote is. I think it's on the slide, that the most environmentally sustainable building in the Caribbean is a functional historical building. The next slide will show you, these architects, which are Taylor architects. They're a husband and wife partnership in Kingston. Susan was trained in Switzerland. Mark is one of the first graduates of the School of Architecture in 1995. And their ethos is socially driven with commitment to helping others and improving the lives and conditions, creating safe environments through architecture. This project, which is also on the next slide, has some key strategies in it in terms of the next slide. Utilizing the site, looking how sites can provide privacy, security, and also provide stepping of volumes that creates convectional airflow and is conducive to teaching and learning with the quality of life. This project won several awards. You can go on to the next practice, which would be someone maybe that's familiar to most people in the room, architect Mandalay Newton, who and again an alumnus of the school in 2001. And she's now working this particular building. She did a series of buildings for ACLA architects and formerly works. And what Mandalay was able to do as also, being part of the TT Green Building Council was to work on reducing the energy consumption in the Republic Bank models. And there were several that were done. She's now in the United States, licensed to practice in Florida. And she's teaching at Florida Atlantic University, training interns and doing some interesting things with artificial intelligence. The next slide is another practice, this group in Kingston. Again, they're also graduates of the school in 2019, 2009, 2005. And their interest really is in how architecture can be, the practice can be more entrepreneurial. I mean, they don't wait for clients, but they go out and proactively seek projects. This particular building has just won an award, America's Property Award, for Caribbean architecture. And they have exaggerated elements in it in terms of how the architecture is interpreted. Traditional architecture, veranda or trellis, vertical shape. But the other thing is is monitored by a building information management system, regulates the lighting, the fire and safety systems. It has expandable modules in it, and it can become more intricate in terms of the supply, air supply, performance, and energy, also life cycle assessment in the future. But this particular group, because they go out and find these sites and then approach developers, they're having an ongoing conversation with the municipality in terms of the development orders in Kingston and how increased densities, the projects are testing the capacity of the city infrastructure, especially water supply and waste management, in terms of the performance of the buildings. The next slide is of another woman who is working, again, a graduate of the school. She's working with Port Authority Jamaica, and really has found it of benefit in terms of working with a multidisciplinary team on projects to solve problems, from project planning to implementation, and large infrastructural projects having to do with the port. That she was practicing architecture in a firm that, and she acknowledges the contribution of our mentors at HMRW, who instill ethic of practice management and contract administration, which has really helped in terms of now working at this level with other members of the built environment team. And the last slide would be architect Ricardo Noala, who is again now probably the third generation of graduates at the school at ACLA, or second generation, have become directors. This is again another commercial building, which is of the Republic Bank family. The last slide on the case studies is two individuals, Melanie Archer and Richard Naptu. And they both studied architecture, but they ended up doing some interesting things in terms of how what they've folded, their knowledge is folded into. Melanie has built a practice today primarily focused on editing book design, and intermittently includes curating, branding, design management, art book. She runs art book publishing. She runs a co-working studio, artistic center in Port of Spain. And Richard Natu is a graduate of this CSA 2016. He's a visual artist now and has exhibited in outside of Jamaica and London, most recently in South Africa. He started his practice with a grant and is involved with some of the painting that's happening, the murals are happening with Kingston Creative, downtown Kingston, in terms of trying to revitalize the city. That just shows a kind of a sampling of the direction people are going in terms of the ways of practice, forms of practice, and the influence that architecture can have on civil society, but also, the traditional forms of building. I just have a couple more wrap-up slides, if you don't mind me continuing.
Yeah. 2 more slides, you said? Go ahead.
Yeah, I know we started late.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't your fault. We had some technical difficulties.
Yeah, sorry about that. So next slide. So the AXAC survey identified that the next decade of architecture and the Caribbean will contend with moving targets for loss of land, adaptation, resilience, climate risk management, infrastructural and physical planning development. The MRA, interregional MRA, and anticipated EPA will offer opportunities for mobility, streamlining building industry standards across the region, and increasing multi-stakeholder engagement. External competition is anticipated to drive collaboration by strengthening the region's attention to code legislation and enforcement as built environment professionals seek a common framework. General sentiment is that with serious and careful planning, freer market conditions can develop cross-cultural communication, inclusivity, and find greater gains in a wider pool of expertise, best practices to advocate for building standards. Education, lifelong learning, professional development, and the registration process will require frequent updates to track new knowledge in architecture theory, building science, technical and communication systems, and AI. Interregional apprenticeship and internships with design build opportunities for technical innovation, research capacities recommended. The case studies illustrate diverse forms of practice and associated ethos. The work of the alumni of the Regional Architecture School, 35 years, speaks to CARICOM's dream to fully register architects inscribed in its territory and its time as the heritage for the future. Practices are attending to UN Sustainable Development Goals in the context of island states. And they're, with the examples shown, they're attending to social agency, climate literacy in urban and rural sites, and sustainable consumption and production, infrastructural projects, and life below land. I think it's important to state this because there have been several things in the articles in the papers of late in meeting the SDGs, and I think that the work that is there, that is being produced, are actually addressing some of the development goals. It's just it's somehow not reaching the media the way it should.
Thank you.
Okay. And
Yeah,
a professional code of conduct ethic has expanded to the scale of environmental justice. So in conclusion, you will see this legacy of climate agendas, which I guess we're all familiar with. And the next slide just points to the fact that Antigua and Barbuda will be creating a SIDS Center of Excellence, which is part of the framework for developing initiatives with the UN. And I would just like to thank you for allowing me to continue.
No problem. Thank you very much.